On the 4th of August, 1940, 3 waves of Luftwaffe bombers struck what appeared to be a fully operational RAF fighter station near Tangmere in Sussex. Intelligence photographs had shown unmistakable signs of military activity: hangars with distinctive shadows, Hurricane fighters arranged on dispersal pans, petrol warriors parked near the perimeter, even anti-aircraft gun emplacements. The German crews dropped their bombs with precision, confident they delivered a devastating blow to Fighter Command's defensive network. They hadn't. They'd attacked Gumber Farm, a field cleared by RAF personnel with picks and shovels, populated with canvas and wood aircraft that cost $15 each to build and guarded by Lewis guns mounted on wooden posts. The real RAF Tangmere 3 miles away remained untouched. This wasn't luck. It was the opening salvo in what would become the most sophisticated deception campaign of the Second World War, masterminded by a retired Royal Engineers colonel who understood a fundamental truth. What reconnaissance cameras see matters more than what's actually there. Standard military thinking in 1939 emphasized hardened defenses and dispersed assets. The Air Ministry's pre-war doctrine called for widely separated aircraft on reinforced concrete hardstands protected by blast pens and anti-aircraft batteries. Airfields were built with the assumption that being seen was inevitable. The goal was merely to survive the resulting attack. German intelligence agreed. Luftwaffe target folders meticulously catalogued every RAF station in Britain, hangar locations, runway alignments, technical sites, even the positions of water towers and wireless masts. The folders distributed to bomber crews showed these installations ringed in red, numbered and annotated in precise German script. Flugplatz, 4 hangars, aircraft parking areas. The mathematics seemed inescapable. If you knew where something was, you could destroy it. But Colonel John Fischer Turner, appointed in September 1939 to establish Britain's deception program, asked a different question. What if the enemy's certainty about your location was your greatest weapon? Turner, who'd served as Director of Works and Buildings at the Air Ministry since 1931, possessed an unusual combination of skills: qualified pilot, civil engineer, and possessed of a mind that thought like a film director. He established his headquarters not at a military installation, but at Sound City Film Studios in Shepperton, Surrey. His staff weren't soldiers, but set designers, lighting technicians, prop makers, and scenic artists. Whilst conventional military planners focused on making real targets harder to hit, Turner's team focused on making fake targets impossible to ignore. The logic was brutal in its simplicity. German bombers carried finite ordnance loads. Every bomb dropped on a dummy site was a bomb that wouldn't hit a factory, a squadron, or a city. Turner called his daytime installations K-sites, decoy airfields designed to draw attacks away from operational stations. By the summer of 1940, he'd established 100 dummy airfields across Britain, protected by approximately 400 dummy aircraft. The secret wasn't in creating perfect replicas. It was in understanding exactly what German reconnaissance cameras would record. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft operated at altitudes between 20,000 and 30,000 feet using high-resolution cameras capable of capturing remarkable detail. Photo interpreters at German intelligence facilities could identify aircraft types, count vehicles, and assess damage from previous raids. They looked for specific signatures: the distinctive cruciform shape of hangars, the dark rectangles of tarmac dispersal pans, the thin lines of perimeter tracks. Most critically, they looked for shadows. In aerial photography, shadows don't lie. They reveal three-dimensional structures that paint alone cannot disguise. A hangar casts a shadow. An aircraft casts a shadow. Even a petrol lorry, if the sun angle is correct, casts a recognizable shadow. German photo interpreters were trained to read these shadows like text, cross-referencing sun position with time of day to verify that what they saw was genuine. Turner's film industry experts understood this intimately. They'd spent years creating the illusion of depth on two-dimensional sets. The challenge with dummy aircraft wasn't making them look real up close. It was making their shadows appear real from 6 miles up. The solution was elegantly simple. Paint the shadows directly onto the ground. Canvas and frame. Spitfires and Hurricanes were elevated on spindly poles typically 18 to 24 in high. The propeller itself often served as one of the support points beneath and slightly offset from each dummy aircraft. Ground crews painted dark shadows using bituminous emulsion, the same color-based paint used for tarmac surfaces. The shadows weren't mere dark patches. They were carefully shaped to match the sun angle for the time of day when reconnaissance flights were most likely. For morning light, shadows extended to the west. For afternoon light, to the east. Some installations changed their shadow patterns seasonally as the sun's angle shifted. The effect was devastating. In one documented instance, a German photo interpreter examining images of a K site near RAF Debon noted in his analysis numerous aircraft visible on dispersals, shadow patterns consistent with morning reconnaissance. The Luftwaffe mounted a substantial raid on the location. Every aircraft was made of painted canvas stretched over timber frames manufactured by Green Brothers Engineering Company in Hailsham for £15 per unit, roughly 110,000th the cost of an actual Hurricane. The real RAF Debon, meanwhile, had dispersed its fighters into the surrounding countryside, parking them beneath trees in carefully selected locations where natural foliage broke up their outlines. The conventional view held that aircraft needed concrete beneath them, clear approaches for taxiing, and open spaces for maintenance. Fighter Command's pre-war doctrine specified that dispersal area should be positioned around the airfield perimeter at intervals of at least 150 feet, constructed of reinforced concrete in either frying pan or spectacle loop configurations. Each hard stand cost hundreds of pounds to build and was plainly visible from the air. A clear target marker saying aircraft here. Critics argued that without proper surfaces, undercarriages would sink into soft earth, making aircraft unserviceable. Without clear approaches, pilots would find maneuvering impossible. Without dedicated maintenance areas, keeping fighters operational would prove impractical. Standard thinking, in short, held that effective air operations required purpose-built infrastructure. Reality proved otherwise. In the summer of 1940, RF squadrons began hiding fighters in forests, not in purpose-built shelters, but simply beneath trees. Pilots would taxi their Hurricanes and Spitfires off the standard dispersal pans and into tree-lined areas bordering airfields. Ground crews laid metal tracking or timber planking to prevent undercarriages sinking into soft ground. Simple solutions that cost shillings rather than pounds. Natural tree cover, pilots discovered, was remarkably effective. Concealment. The irregular canopy broke up aircraft outlines. Dappled light and shadow disguised the distinctive shapes that photo interpreters sought. Most importantly, forests were everywhere, and German reconnaissance couldn't photograph every tree line in southern England. The dispersal technique evolved rapidly through practical experience. Squadrons learned that hardwood forests with mature trees provided better cover than conifer plantations. Oak and beech canopies created irregular shadow patterns that confused aerial observation, whilst pine forest showed more regular spacing that drew the eye. Aircraft were positioned nose first into tree lines with the engine cowling, the most recognizable element of a fighter's profile, tucked deepest into the foliage. Ground crews camouflaged the tail section, which inevitably protruded, using cut branches and camouflage netting. Refueling and rearming occurred under the trees. Pilots reported that the technique added perhaps 5 minutes to their scramble time, a trivial cost for near-complete concealment. At RAF Bolio in the New Forest, 15 hard stands were positioned along the perimeter track, conforming to Air Ministry standards. But the real parking areas were in Hawkill enclosure where bombs were stored on flat concrete bases hidden beneath timber and camouflage roofs supported by telegraph poles. Dispersal huts, simple Nissen structures designated on wartime plans as Type 296542, were positioned between gorse bushes and tree lines, invisible from above. Similar techniques spread across Fighter Command. At RAF Stony Cross, also in the New Forest, 3 concrete runways were built to standard specifications. Aircraft used them for takeoff and landing, then immediately dispersed into the surrounding woodland. Reconnaissance photographs showed the runways clearly, but consistently failed to locate the actual fighter strength. The principle extended beyond individual aircraft. Entire bomb stores disappeared into forest enclosures. Fuel dumps were positioned beneath tree canopies. Even maintenance facilities were hidden, not in obvious hangars, but in dispersed workshops that German photo interpreters dismissed as farm buildings or civilian structures. The forest, it turned out, wasn't an obstacle to air operations. It was the airfield's most valuable asset. On the 27th of July, 1940, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft photographed RF Yoden in West Yorkshire. The resulting images showed 3 large hangars with distinctively camouflaged roofs, their outlines broken up with irregular paint patterns. More interestingly, they showed what appeared to be agricultural land bisected by a hedge line running diagonally across several fields. The hedge was in fact a runway, and the hedge line was painted directly onto the tarmac in dark green and brown. German photo interpreters trained to identify artificial structures looked for regular geometric shapes that didn't match natural landscapes. The Jeden runway, carefully painted to mimic the surrounding field patterns, appeared to be nothing more than farmland. This technique, painting false field boundaries and hedges onto runways and hard stands, became standard practice across RAF stations by mid-1940. At RAF Staverton in Gloucestershire, camouflage artists created an imitation lane that snaked diagonally across the airfield. They painted boundaries to mimic hedges in dark brown and green. Sections of the runway received irregular dark shapes designed to simulate woodland. From 20,000 feet, the installation appeared to be rolling countryside with patchy tree cover. Unremarkable landscape that German photo interpreters would scan past while searching for geometric certainties. The illusion wasn't perfect. Close examination would reveal the deception. But Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft couldn't loiter for close examination. They flew fast at high altitude, and photo interpreters worked from single-pass imagery. What appeared unremarkable in a first glance simply didn't receive a second. At RAF Basingen in Cambridge, engineers exploited the site's natural advantages. The airfield had been deliberately constructed in low ground between tributaries of the River Cam, boggy terrain that produced persistent mist. Before concrete runways were laid, the grass landing strips were painted to blend into surrounding fields. After conversion to Class A standards in 1942, requiring extensive concrete work, the areas between runways received agricultural camouflage. Dark green patches simulated plowed earth. Lighter sections suggested ground or growing crops. Curved lines mimicked drainage ditches and farm tracks. The concrete runways themselves, 150 feet wide and up to 2,000 yards long, were treated with coarse pre-colored stone chippings to reduce shine and break up their stark appearance. At RAF Gulfport, similar experiments used fine pre-colored slag chippings, techniques borrowed from non-shine-hard tennis court construction. The paint itself was subject to intensive research. The Paint Research Station at Teddington, now the Paint Research Association, published detailed specifications in 1939. Bituminous emulsions were designated for tarmac surfaces, concrete, and felted roofs, materials that would accept cola-based paints. These created the dark shadows beneath dummy aircraft and the false hedge lines across runways. 4 grass areas and open ground. Dusting powders consisting of chalk or gypsum mixed with pigment and adhesive were finely ground and scattered to create field patterns. The powder settled into grass, creating the appearance of agricultural land without killing the vegetation. Important because actual aircraft still needed to use these surfaces. The most elaborate deception occurred at RAF Hinton in the Hedges in Northamptonshire, where No. 1 Camouflage Unit based at the airfield itself painted wooden hedge patterns across the southwestern half of the entire installation. Aerial photographs from November 1940 show Blenheim bombers and Anson trainers clearly visible on dispersal pans, but those dispersal pans appear to be embedded in a patchwork of woodland and hedge rows. The boundaries between operational spaces and camouflaged areas were deliberately blurred. Perimeter tracks received false hedge lines at intervals that matched genuine field boundaries in the surrounding countryside. Where concrete met grass, the transition was disguised with irregular paint patterns that suggested natural landscape variation rather than military construction. German intelligence knew RAF stations existed in these locations. But knowing a station existed and being able to identify its exact layout, its operational areas, its vulnerable points, that was the intelligence that enabled precision bombing. Turner's camouflage program didn't make airfields invisible. It made them illegible. On the 15th of September, 1940, the date now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, Luftwaffe intelligence estimated Fighter Command's operational strength at approximately 150 serviceable fighters. They based this estimate partly on direct combat reports, partly on loss assessments, and partly on reconnaissance photographs showing aircraft on known airfields. The actual figure was 732 serviceable fighters. The 580 aircraft discrepancy existed because German photo interpreters were counting what they could see, and what they could see was increasingly fictitious. K-Site dummy aircraft appeared in their tallies as genuine fighters. Real squadrons hidden in forests appeared as destroyed or non-operational. Airfields heavily camouflaged with false field patterns appeared as secondary or training stations rather than operational bases. The intelligence failure had operational consequences. Luftwaffe raid planning relied on their assessments of RAF strength. When raids encountered fiercer resistance than expected, more fighters than intelligence suggested should exist. German aircrew reported that Fighter Command must be transferring squadrons from the north. This wasn't happening. The fighters were simply hidden, and the Luftwaffe was attacking expensive decoys whilst missing real targets. The 4th of August raid on Gumber Farm near Tangmere represented precisely this dynamic. 3 bombing waves struck what German intelligence assessed as an active fighter station. The crews returned reporting successful hits on hangars, dispersal areas, and parked aircraft. The reality was timber, canvas, and 15-pound dummy Hurricanes. Real Tangmere, 3 miles distant, launched fighters that intercepted subsequent raids. The effectiveness of decoys varied with implementation quality. Simple dummy aircraft fooled no one at low altitude, but proved remarkably effective against high-altitude reconnaissance. Canvas stretched over plywood frames painted with semi-gloss paint to simulate metal surfaces and including visible details like flap lines, aileron hinges, and canopy frames created convincing imagery from 25,000 feet. The key refinement was the shadow. Dummy aircraft elevated on poles with painted shadows beneath them oriented to match the sun angle past photo interpreter scrutiny. Flat cutouts painted to simulate 3-dimensional aircraft used by both German and Allied forces rarely succeeded because they lacked shadows and changed appearance dramatically with sun angle. The dummy aircraft industry became remarkably sophisticated. When Colonel Turner first approached aircraft manufacturers about producing decoys, they proposed complex designs costing significant sums. Turner, in what proved a characteristic flash of insight, asked the film prop industry to tender instead. Film set builders at Shepperton and other studios produced canvas and frame Hurricanes, Spitfires, and Blenheims for roughly 1/4 the aircraft manufacturers' quoted prices. These weren't crude approximations. Surviving examples show attention to detail. Propeller blades with visible pitch, undercarriage struts with cross-bracing, even round markings in the correct positions. From ground level, they appeared obviously fake. From camera altitude, they were indistinguishable from operational aircraft, provided they had proper shadows. By late 1940, Turner's operation had expanded to include Q sites, nighttime decoys using electric lights to simulate airfields. Initially, these used paraffin lamps positioned to replicate landing strip lights, but this proved dangerous to actual RAF aircraft attempting to identify genuine stations in darkness. The solution was electrically powered installations with control bunkers where operators could illuminate the dummy airfield only after German bombers had been detected approaching. The understanding that what reconnaissance sees matters more than what exists remains fundamental to military deception. Turner's insight that film set designers were better equipped to fool cameras than military engineers proved prophetic in an age where satellite reconnaissance and thermal imaging dominate intelligence gathering. The painted hedge lines across RF Yaden's runway, the canvas Hurricanes on spindly poles at Gumber Farm, the fighters hidden beneath oak trees at Bolio. These weren't desperate improvisations by a nation fighting for survival. They were calculated applications of a principle that sounds obvious only in retrospect. Intelligence depends on observation. Observation depends on recognition. And recognition depends on expectation. Change the expectation and you change what the enemy sees. Make them certain they found your airfields and they'll bomb shadows whilst your real squadrons wait in forest they never thought to search. The Luftwaffe's reconnaissance cameras were excellent. Their photo interpreters were skilled, but they were searching for geometric certainties in a landscape Turner's team had systematically made uncertain. And in war, uncertainty is often more valuable than armor. That principle worked out with paint and canvas, and 15-pound dummy aircraft in the summer of 1940 proved more effective than thousands of tons of concrete could ever have been. The bombers came, the bombs fell, and the shadows burned. The real aircraft, hidden beneath trees that reconnaissance cameras dismissed as meaningless woodland, survived to fight another day. That was the secret. Not invisibility, but selective visibility. Show them exactly what they expect to see. Put it precisely where they expect to find it.